Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Outside Podcast. I'm the host, Wayne Ebersole, and we have kind of a unique topic of conversation today. Aaron, why don't you tell us what we're talking about today?
Yeah, sure, Wayne. Thank you for having my cell phone. Slade's also here to join us today. Slade
Yes,
Johnson
welcome,
down in
guys.
Alabama. So I think today's topic, we're actually going to talk a little bit about Big Sky Capital,
Okay.
which was founded by you, Wayne.
Yes, it
You're
was
founder of Big Sky Capital, and so Big Sky Capital is actually how I met Wayne. I
interesting.
met Wayne about a year ago at a little over a year ago at a conference down in Fort Lauderdale, and actually it's been a lot more than a year ago now. And Wayne was starting up Big Sky Capital, focused on regenerative agriculture investing, and he really has a unique focus. And I want to really get into that today. We were at dinner in Dubai back in June, and we were sitting there having dinner at this wonderful Middle Eastern place that I love to go to in Dubai. And Wayne just rolled out about 6 minutes, 7 minutes of the most wonderful description of Big Sky Capital I've ever heard him talk about. And so I want to try to capture that today. I
Okay.
want you, I told you then, I said, Wayne, I said, I want that on video. And so here we are. We're going to try our best to capture it. So,
Sure.
Wayne, we're at dinner.
Uh-huh.
We're having this wonderful meal. We're going to pretend that Slade was there. Slade, hopefully you can be there next time we go. I'll take you there. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's cheap. It's really good.
Yeah, it's really good. It
Um,
was.
and more than you could eat. And we're sitting there having dinner, and we're talking about Big Sky Capital. We've got this other gentleman from the Netherlands that's with
Yep.
us. And this gentleman from the Netherlands knows nothing about what Wayne does. And Wayne just rolls it out and starts talking about regenerative ag, Big Sky Capital. So Wayne, try to go back to that moment. We're at dinner. We know nothing about Big Sky Capital. Let's try to repeat that. Please go for it. Tell
Sure.
me about
No,
it.
absolutely. I don't even remember what all I said that time. I just kind of have the whole spiel that it just rolls
Of
off my
course,
tongue.
of course.
No, so my background is in accounting information systems. So I've been, in accounting and all that kind of stuff. And then I had the privilege of being a finance guy for a seed and soil health company, which I was joined in 2013. And during that process, not only was I doing, the accounting work for the company, but we got to start to see how farmers and the financial condition of farms in North America. And so most farms, probably over 90, well, I know well over 90%, at least at that time, and it hasn't changed much since then, are farmed with what we call conventional farming, which is a monocrop is grown, cash crop is grown every year. There's a lot of tillage, sometimes 2-3 passes of tillage over the field. There's a lot of synthetic chemicals and fertilizers that are put on, herbicides, insecticides, and all that kind of stuff to grow that crop. But what happens is you're, in essence, when you farm in that monocrop method, you're depleting the soil. You're mining the soil of its nutrients, of its microbiome, of its capability to produce healthy plants, and so on and so forth, because there's not a lot of change. There's not a lot done to maintain it. And a farmer has to think of his soil as a bank. You get out of it what you put into it. And so I had the privilege of working with a renowned, back then the term regenerative agriculture didn't even exist. It was just, we called it no-till farming or no-till with cover crops or something like that. But it became what is known today as regenerative agriculture management. And so there's basically six principles to that. And one of the things is you stop tillage. So you go no-till. You try to keep some kind of armor or protection on the soil. You try to keep a living root in the soil, and the reason you do that is to continue to host that funguses that produce those nutrients for you. And then you have some form of reinoculation um, through the use of livestock, and it can be as little as 6 weeks out of the year that you'd have livestock on it. And so and there's things like context and a few other things, but those are the core principles of the regenerative ag thing. And so the thing that really bothered me about farmers is, number one, the average age of a North American farmer is 58 years old, and that age is climbing every year. So that means younger farmers are not getting into the business. And the question is, why not? And the reality is I don't know of many industries where there's so much capital at risk for so little return as farming. And yet, farming, food production, what in any way, shape, or form, is the core of life, really. Water and food. And so that's a huge concern. The other thing that was concerned is there's a steadily decline, and I think it's on the average of 100,000 acres a year. We're losing farmland in North America. It's going into development, it's going into other uses or whatever. And so at some point, you hit a pinch point where you don't have enough land to produce enough food. You've mined the land that you do have pretty much to death, and you plateau or start decline your food production capabilities. Now, as of today, we're still, a net exporter of food and grain and things to the world, but that is slowly coming to a pinch point. So that whole thing started me down the path of how do we make farming more profitable for people so that younger people, younger generations, next generations want to get involved in it and want to be a part of this. And so when working with farmers, the whole thing was, well, if I'm 58 years old, and the other thing is it takes some time to transition a farm operation or a ranch operation from a conventionally way managed practice to a regenerative way. And on average, we've seen that takes about 7 years. Now, there's some that'll do it in 5, others may take 10, things like that. And the way we measure that progress is how much the soil organic matter increases during the time frame. So soil organic matter is kind of a measurement of soil health. And an interesting fact about soil organic matter, every 1% that you go up in soil organic matter, you increase the water holding capacity of that ground by 27,000 gallons per acre. So this produces a lot of more drought tolerance and more resistance to dry periods. Farming regenerative increases the amount of plant available nutrients to the plants. Your plants tend to become healthier over time, over successive years. And the real benefit, where the profitability comes from, is the eventual, you can reduce your input costs. You can reduce the amount of fertilizer, the amount of insecticides or herbicides that are needed to keep pests and weeds and things at bay. And that's where the profitability comes from in regenerative agriculture. So by doing that, on average, we can double the profitability of a farm operation, but it does take a transition period. And so a lot of these guys are saying, hey, I don't have the financial capability to, sustain maybe 3 years of reduced yields or reduced returns as I make this transition. Or, you know what, I'm too old. I'm not, I've been doing it this way for 30 years, 40 years. I'm not going to make a change now. And so that was kind of the catalyst for what eventually became Big Sky Capital Group. And the whole idea behind that, our company, is to find those properties, those farm operations, those ranch operations where people maybe are retiring or they want to get out of it, or they're just having a hard time. I mean, farming this year doing very well, but a few years ago it was very difficult, and suicide rates were, I think, second only to military people with PTSD symptoms. So the suicide rates were pretty significant, especially in the High Plains region. So that really hit me as well. And so, like, what can we do to help these guys? And so our fund basically, we step in. We'll maybe buy a farm or a ranch from somebody that's retiring, and we'll run it through a transition process, either working with another local farmer who is a regenerative, who has taken up regenerative agriculture, or we'll put our own manager on it. We'll transition that farm, and then we'll hopefully sell it back to a person in a younger generation that wants to continue farming and wants to continue that process. And by doing that, we strive to double the profitability and also give our limited partners a decent return and a tax benefit for helping us do that. So I jokingly call it the fix and flips for farms.
So the fund. Let's talk a little bit about the actual fund structure itself. You've done a
Mm-hmm.
great job of telling about what is the strategy from a scientific regenerative ag perspective.
Sure.
Let's just touch a little bit about, like, what is the structure of Big Sky Capital. How much are you raising?
Yep.
How does an investor into Big Sky Capital get a return on their investment?
Yep.
How does that work?
Okay. So what we have is traditional, what's commonly referred to as a traditional fund structure. We have a general partner entity that owns 20% of the fund, that kind of oversees it and kind of is the catalyst there. 80% of it, the fund then is sold to limited partners, accredited investors who can buy in and starting at $100,000 into the fund. And for the total fund amount, we're raising about $150 million. And the reason we kind of targeted that number, it's small enough to keep us, give us some of the exemptions that we need, but it's large enough to let us do several properties, on average, maybe about 10 properties, and kind of really get a management structure, a fund management structure in place, managing these types of operations. And so, and then we have a third entity, which is the management company that oversees the investments, oversees the returns. And the benefits to our limited partners is, number one, there's a big tax benefit to them. A little known fact is there's, those of you that are familiar with the multifamily space know there's a lot of cost segregation analysis done on properties. And we've brought that to the farm and ranch space, which there's not a lot of people doing that. And so that maximizes the tax benefit that our investors can get from that, especially if somebody has a lot of income, they're looking to offset that benefits them. And the other thing is we're looking to buy farms that are just beat down and heavily eroded, depleted, that kind of thing. So those can be bought at a discount versus once they're transitioned and once we've raised the soil organic matter, that land actually sells at a premium. So there's a spread there that our investors partake in as well.
Now, Wayne, we've also worked together outside, and Big Sky Capital have worked together to essentially launch a digital asset, a token, outside OTSD Regen Ag.
That's correct.
REGEN Ag on Algorand. And we're in the very early stages of it. And the strategy there is to essentially carve out a portion of that LP position that you mentioned for the tokenization. So essentially, we're setting up a entity that will become part of that LP that will invest alongside those accredited investors.
That's correct. Yes, that's correct.
So, just wanted to point that out. I know you mentioned that accredited investors with a minimum of 100,000, but we've also created a way where someone can either buy the token on the open market, or use digitalpropertyrights.io, which is an outside managed website platform to buy the token and take it into the secondary market. So there's multiple ways that we're working on doing that, and that's very innovative. And we're also doing that to take this to a global marketplace to scale. So I just wanted to make sure we touched on that. And like I said, we're in the early stages about that. We'll talk more about that in future episodes as things evolve. But there's something else that's really unique about your structure that we talk a lot about land.
Yes.
But it's not just land. You actually have a venture capital structure around Big Sky Capital. So if Slade had a startup company that was doing something to improve the soil in agriculture in Nebraska or Kansas or Oklahoma, then Big Sky Capital could very well make a decision to invest in Slade's startup.
That's correct. Yeah, we are set up as a venture capital fund. And the reason we do that is because it gives us the most flexibility with real estate and with farm and ranch operations and with any other kind of agriculture-based business that could benefit us on that. So yeah, like your example of Slade started, I don't know, let's say maybe a biochar business or something like that. We're looking very heavily at using biochar as part of accelerating the process because that's a huge component, and the USDA is looking at putting some money available for that. So that also the venture capital structure allows us the flexibility to invest in other businesses that support regenerative agriculture. So another one is seed production companies. So like cover crop seeds, there's always seems like there's always a shortage of cover crop seed, depending what type of species you're looking at and stuff. So our company can invest in something like that, just to help allocate some of that seed for our operations as well. So we have a very flexible structure.
Yeah, as you know, Wayne, I believe I've shared with you in the past, we've done a lot of research with outside on biochar, particularly some farmers in Nebraska.
Yep.
We've done a lot of that work in western Nebraska, that early stage research, and we see that opportunity as well, which is why we're working together, why we're
Yes,
aligned.
absolutely.
There's another opportunity globally that has come up, particularly in my travels in the Middle East over in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, UAE,
Yep.
um, about food security.
Yes.
And so, food security, tell me about how you see Big Sky Capital fitting into food security opportunities globally, to help these evolving nations develop a robust in house, as you may call it, or domestic um, agriculture farming operation so that they can essentially
Yep.
meet that food security concern and need.
Yeah. So we have a much longer term vision than just an initial ag fund here in North America. That's kind of just, I call it the proof of concept fund, if you will. But eventually, we'd like to go internationally with this. So there's, for instance, in the UAE, there, when COVID hit, there was a huge short, or not a huge, but there was a shortage of food. They had struggled to get food because everything was shut down. And up to that point, I believe they imported most of their food, if not all of it. Same thing in Africa. Certain countries, struggled to produce food that they normally imported that they couldn't. And Africa is an interesting continent because there's a man by the name of Alan Savory that's doing regenerative ag research over there as well, and they're actually taking desert ground and turning it into farmland. And you have to have an animal or livestock component to do that. And so there's a lot of opportunity to look at some of these desert areas where we can reclaim it and start to farm it and start producing a food in these regions locally, um, that other maybe not doing that. The other thing is the whole vertical farming thing. I know the um, United Arab Emirates has opened one of, I think it's one of the world's largest vertical farming
That's correct.
facilities over there as well. So, and we've talked to a few guys in Colorado that are doing that as well, that have the technology to scale large vertical farming operations. So there's a lot more to food security and production than just regenerative ag, although regenerative ag plays a huge portion of that because it becomes a sustainable model that makes money for farmers long term. But there's also other things to look at, like vertical farming and all that kind of stuff. So ways to get irrigation technology is another thing. Getting some more water into these desert areas to grow plants and that livestock can graze, and start this whole rebuilding the organic matter of some of these areas that just have been um, previously have looked like there's no way of reclaiming them really.
Wayne, what about kind of going back to the farms? What's been Do you have to be completely funded before you guys are going to look at buying a farm and taking on the first one, or are y'all, if one, if you had some funding partially funded and had an opportunity there, are y'all ready to go and start right away? Kind of what's y'all's timeline, I guess?
Yeah, so we don't we have kind of an open ended fund. We have a escrow reserve of
Okay.
$5 million. So once we break escrow, once we cross that $5 million mark, our documents and our filings allow us to start investing at that point. So that gives us basically one operation to get started with.
Hmm.
150 million. There's a lot of these farms. Let's say we're looking at one in Illinois right now. A lot of these farms have all the fences have been taken out, all the fence rows have been taken out. They may not have any irrigation or center pivots put on it. So a lot of our money also goes into reestablishing the capability to incorporate livestock easily into these operations, or to maybe provide irrigation or some of that kind of stuff. So, the fund will allow us to do, we figure, about 10 to 12 properties, and regenerate them. And some of these we may be able to turn around in 4 or 5 years and sell them off, and then we'll
Yep.
reinvest maybe for another 4 or 5 years. So we're an 8-year fund with the option of a 2-year extension, giving us the total of 10 years to kind of transition as many properties and flip them as quickly as we can.
Great. So I guess somebody too could reach out, on both sides. One, if they had somebody's listening to this and they're thinking about, hey, I'd like to get into farming, or like I'm ready to get out of it. That's something you can keep track of a pipeline
Yes,
for
we do.
properties.
In fact,
Hmm.
we have a list of farm managers right now, people that have come to us and said, hey, as soon as you have a farm, like one guy said, I'll move anywhere I have to.
Yeah,
But
he's
we're
ready to go.
focusing on the Mississippi watershed. So, east of the Rockies, west of the Appalachians kind of thing, that center part of the country. I know there's a lot of other funds that focus like on the Pacific Northwest, or a lot of funds focus on California and the orchard and vegetable markets. But we're targeting the traditional corn, beans, corn, soybeans, wheat farmers of the Midwest High Plains region, because that's where, number one, that's where we're the most experienced in from the last 10 years, but also where we see the most potential to grow organic matter as quickly as possible. So,
Yeah, and I guess you mentioned other funds. So is there, some other companies that are doing other funds doing the similar as you guys?
yeah, there's one fund I know of in that they only invest in the Pacific Northwest, so they invest in California, Oregon, and Washington.
Yeah,
There's a couple other funds that I know of. Some of the big investment companies have like strictly an California fund that all they do is invest in orchards, like citrus and almond orchards. So
yeah,
there's a lot of even more specialized things. We're broadening it a little bit with that, but and also because we're a venture capital fund, so it allows us to also focus on regenerative ag businesses that
yeah.
support our farm and ranch operations as well. So that's kind of the other unique portion of us.
I
Wayne,
would think that
I
would
know.
give. I was just gonna say, I
Go,
think that gives some investors some confidence too,
Yeah.
and that this isn't just a completely new concept out of nowhere,
Yeah,
and
no, it's not.
you got your own spin on it, but
Yeah,
yeah, that's good.
Wayne, I know. Last question here. We'll work towards wrapping things up.
yeah,
I know you've past few weeks, you've been traveling quite a bit.
yes,
Spent some time in Colorado, Utah, various places.
yeah,
Tell us a little bit about where you've been, what you're seeing, what the environment is for this type of opportunity. Just share with us some of what you've seen the past few weeks.
sure. No, some of the travels. I was actually at an event earlier this year where one of the speakers, who's a renowned investment fund manager that's now retired, said agriculture and commodities is one of the few markets where there's not a bubble in it, and I thought that was pretty interesting. Farmland also almost never has gone down in value. It may has plateaued for a while, but it has never gone down in value because, like one old guy said, they ain't making any more of it. So,
Yeah, a farm in Missouri just sold for $33,000 an acre, something like
yep.
that. Just
And I heard
insane
of one
number.
in Pennsylvania that sold for $48,000 an acre,
Good
and
Lord.
it's just I like there's so some of these areas have probably some bubbles starting. Maybe I don't know, but you look at Bill Gates; he's investing in farmland. Warren Buffett's investing in farmland, and they see it as an inflation hedge. They see it as a
Yeah,
commodity, especially if it has water rights with it. That's going to increase in value and produce probably bigger returns than what some other investments might at this point. So,
just imagine what we could do as we continue to build out digital real world assets on
yes,
Bitcoin, Ethereum, Algorand, Polygon Matic with farmland in the
yep,
United States. I mean, that's just I mean, I hear in my world, in the digital asset world, I hear so much talk about people talking about real world assets.
yeah,
And this is about as real as it gets.
it is. It is.
So that outside regen ag token, we're
No,
going to continue to build that out and grow that. Is there anything you want to share just before we wrap up here?
yeah, no. I just appreciate that time we met back in Fort Lauderdale, and I didn't know who you were. You didn't know who I was, but you were the only guy up front talking about ag
I'm
land.
still trying to figure out who I am.
You were the only guy talking about ag land. So I was in this room of everybody talking about multifamily stuff and medical practices and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, man, I'm a fish out of water. And then Aaron gets up front and talks about ag and forest land. And I'm like, I'm going to learn to know that guy.
And
But
you
here
did. You
we
did a
are a
great
year
job of
later.
it.
And I
Yeah.
appreciate the technology and the whole digital asset side of things that you brought to the table and opening this up, because I don't know of another place where somebody who's not an accredited investor could still potentially participate in a real estate play, in an ag play, like we've kind of put together. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much
And
for what you brought to the
we're
table.
still building it out. We'll
Yep.
continue to build it out, and it's a work in progress, and we'll get there. And
Yep.
so we're essentially going to carve out a place for digital assets to work alongside everything that you've shared about is what we're
Yeah.
doing. And so
No,
I'm
I
going to be I'm going to be down in Alabama here in a couple of weeks with Slade, and we're going to be tokenizing a property in Alabama. We're going to be
Cool.
taking the strategy and applying it to what I think is a 600-acre property in Alabama, Slade.
Yeah,
And
16 and yep.
yeah, so we're going to continue to scale and grow the strategy. And so there's so much opportunity in the regen ag space, and so
Yeah.
we're going to build everything we can to allow people to participate. And that's what
Yeah.
we're doing.
The other thing I like to say
So,
too, a fund structure has to be closed out at some point. Like we have an 8-year, 10-year fund structure. I still want to see at some point where there's companies that long term maybe own some of this land and ensure that it stays in regenerative ag, and they can be maybe tokenized companies or something like that. And I think that's where your company outside could step into a role, something like that at some point down the road, where when a fund structure closes out, there's another company that can do a long term thing to
yeah,
ensure that these farms don't regress back into conventional methods, because once you have a regenerative farm, it's very easy to go back because now you have a lot of available resources, and so you can get away with it for a few years, but eventually you're back in where you were,
yep.
maybe we were
Well,
10
well,
years ago.
thank you. So, what's the weather today in Great Falls, Montana, Wayne?
It's blue skies, clear. It's like 56 degrees. It's just beautiful fall weather. The aspens are at peak or slightly past peak, so it's great.
You started to see some snow on the mountaintops around where you look, and
We haven't seen any snow here, but I was in Colorado earlier this week, and there's some fresh snow in those peaks, so it's coming.
uh-huh.
It's coming.
Where are you today, Slade?
I'm in Alabama. We're sunny and 82 right now. So
Okay,
Good.
good. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
funny.
Well, I'm in Richmond, Virginia today. I think it's like 53 this morning, high of 75 today, sunny, a little bit overcast
Cool.
this evening, I think. So, typical fall weather.
Yep.
Really nice. Cooling off. So, Wayne, we appreciate you sharing with us about Regen Ag, and
Yes. Thank you.
thank you for having us all here today, and happy to have you tell us a little bit more about it. And I know we're working on some guests for some upcoming
Yes.
episodes. I've got a few people that I've already reached out to and we've spoken to.
Yeah.
And like I said, 25th, 26th, Slade and I will be together, and we'll probably try to do some live podcast from Alabama
Yeah.
and see what we can do with that. A challenge is always cell reception in our world, right?
Yep.
Wi-Fi connections and different things. So we're always trying to deal with that. So
Yes.
anyway, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Appreciate you for all being here. And yeah, if the audience has any suggested guests that you'd love to have us interview, suggest them to them. When we post this on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, which will be on all those, feel free to send us messages of guests that you'd like us to interview related to real estate, ag land, or any of that kind of stuff, or token stuff. We'd be more than happy to have those people on as guests as well. So that wraps it up today, folks. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.